We have an inhale and there's a pause. It exists. It might be microscopic. It may not even be noticed, but there's a pause that goes to the exhale. And that is this, there's 4 aspects to a breath: an inhale, a pause, an exhale, and a pause. Most of us aren't thinking about that. So how do we see our life as a matter of experiences and pauses and experiences and pauses? And every night we get to go to bed and begin again.
And thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, my pleasure. I love being a part of things that are related to mindlessness and thought.
So you're known as the love messenger, and you're passionate about helping people become who they truly are. And you've been a body worker for decades. And I don't know how to pronounce this word, a birth doula. Is that how you
Yes,
say
you
it?
did. You
Okay.
did it. Yep. Do you know what that role is?
Yeah, I had to look it up actually, because I mean, like I was familiar with like a midwife and stuff like that. But so you're kind of giving people guidance along the way and like helping the process be as positive as possible, essentially, right?
Yes. As the love messenger, I know that life and my business is the Lotus Path.
Yeah.
Life is fraught with mud, and it's our opportunity to move through that. And working as a birth doula for about 12 years and supporting almost 200 families and little babies show up on the planet, it's a non-medical role. The idea is to support mama and baby essentially on the journey, and partner in emotional and physical and supportive educational ways, and helping them to self-advocate. Often in hospital settings, there are other desires, let's say, maybe than what a woman is stepping into. And my whole body of work, I love to say that I came out of the womb ready to help and support people. And everything I've ever done, my first career was in food service and fine dining. And for me, that was about helping and supporting someone through a dining experience.
No.
And the role of supporting the journey through birth, which is interesting when we think about the idea of this thoughtfully mindless concept, is that we choose to come on this planet. I mean, this is a whole conversation we can dive into, Artie.
Yeah.
The idea, though, is that our choices are then influenced by the beings that are around us. And so that journey of birth is a powerful expression of essentially the beginning of how we show up in our life, and the impact both for the mom and the partner as well as the baby. So my passion in that was really supporting the opportunity for the most, I guess, empowered really is the way to speak into it, empowered way of moving through that experience. So yes, that was a big part of my life. And then as life shifted, it discontinued being my work, let's say.
Yeah, and you're also a speaker and author, and you said your life has been like a lotus, and there's been plenty of mud. So you've already mentioned mud. I'd love to hear about where you are in your journey and kind of like how you got there. And then I think most people intuitively kind of understand what mud means, but maybe you can elaborate on that concept a little bit.
Absolutely. Mud are the beautiful challenges. And I love to also say we receive many gifts in this lifetime, and most of them come in ugly packaging. It's the opportunity to feel gratitude for the life that has shown up in your world. The mud are the different experiences, events, relationships, physically that happen to our bodies, emotionally to our family members. And the lotus essentially started out because I wanted to put a tattoo on my backside because it was so cute. And I was like, I wanted something spiritual there. And I had an experience where in a dear friend's healing space, I was sitting and being with and thinking about what an image, a spiritual image would look like. And through this little tiny stained glass window up high, it felt like a God moment, really. And it was like the light came through and I heard the words lotus flower. And I thought, oh, that's cool. And so actually there's a painting, if you're going to see it in visual of the lotus flower that I chose through an internet search. And actually it brought me into a relationship with the artist who lives in Brazil. And we got to, for now 30 years, we've had a pen pal relationship. Bringing it back, that was my first business, the bodywork practice and the doula work, which was the Lotus Touch. 2 years after I set that in motion, my family had a massive shift. So backing up a little bit, when I was 11, my parents got divorced. And we went on our journey. My dad went on his journey. My mom was on her journey. And 25 years later, my dad showed up at my mom's doorstep. And he walked up to her and he had a little paper bag in his hand. He asked her for a conversation. And when she said, tell me what you want to say, he actually opened the bag, took out a gun, and shot and killed her right there in her driveway, in the driveway of the home that I grew up in. And that was a powerful, obviously, experience to be witness to. And as we were in the preparations for funeral and things of that nature, I remember a moment in a restaurant, and it was another type of God moment, if you will, where I had an immense amount of clarity that this was a spiritual experience, that this was an opportunity for me to grow and evolve. And it really tied in all the pieces that I stand in. And that is that we choose everything. We choose this existence. We choose our parents. We choose our color. We choose our ethnicity. The reason we choose that is thoughtfully mindful because there's an intention. There's an intention for this life. For some of you in this audience, this may be, yeah, I get that. And then others may say, why would I choose? Why would I choose my abusive parent? Why would I choose to be part of a community that feels less than? And I breathe into that and I say, because you're a powerful being and you're here to experience life. And that's what this earth school, this third dimensional reality, I mean, these are all the buzzwords of what we're experiencing. And so for me, the mud are the opportunities for growth. I mean, that is the whole experience of the lotus flower. It exists in the mud. It grows through the mud. It lives in the mud. And its gorgeous blossom is a result of the container that it sits in, which is the mud. And so when we embrace these incredibly potent and challenging experiences in our life with consciousness, with that desire that they're here to show us the way to our blossom. That's what I get really, really high on, is that idea that we are here choosing our life, choosing our hard things because we're that amazing.
I want to talk about choice, but I have to go back to your story with your mother and father a little bit, because I mean that's just. Did you actually see that? Like, were you there when it happened?
So it's funny. So it's interesting. July 22nd this year will be the 20th anniversary of her death.
Yeah.
And that was a Friday morning.
Yeah.
To backtrack a bit on Tuesday, I'd been in a conversation with my brother and my mom about how my dad had reached out for a dinner. And there was a story that I wasn't aware of, and that he had a level of violence energetically that I, as his daughter, wasn't really familiar with. I witnessed him get married 4 other times and have 3 suicide attempts. And he was essentially a narcissist, bipolar individual.
Yeah.
And that was the life that I was raised with. My own journey, I went to therapy at 11, went back at 16. I've sought out therapists and coaches and workshops all my life to truly understand, which has brought me to this point now. To backtrack, what happened was my mother was going to go to the gym, and the next door neighbor, when my mom saw my dad coming, because that previous conversation on Tuesday, which is interesting, I said to my mom, Dad's bark is worse than his bite. Oh, boy, did that resonate for a long time, because I had no idea that he could be violent in that way. So my mom says to the neighbor, go in the house, like, get out of this situation. But she didn't. She went and got in her car. And because the driveways were parked, parallel to one another, she witnessed it. In a way, I'm grateful, because I have a visual for how this occurred. And it was heartbreaking for her to have to witness that. And so basically I got the call from my brother, and that's how it went down. And he drove off, and an hour later was found by the police and taken to jail. I was in San Francisco at the time. This was down in Southern California. And I flew down, and my brother and I went to the jail, and that was surreal. I still see that, the orange suit and the handcuffs and the big glass. And I was like, what, who does this?
Yeah.
And his response was, all the victim narcissist. She treated me as a 3rd or 4th class citizen. It had to be done. I was blown away. And on the flip side of all of this, because I know that we are a spiritual being choosing to have a human experience, somebody asked me about 6 weeks after, like, when would I ever be able to forgive him? And I felt into that. And I was so curious, because I didn't feel the need to forgive him, and I didn't understand why. And later, have you ever heard of the word bibliomancy? Do you know that word?
Bibliomancy. I would imagine it has something to do with books, but
it does. It's when we get information from a book or from a billboard, or something. There's something that shows up, and I consider that a sign from God or from your higher source. And I opened this book at a friend's house, and it was on both pages, huge font, like 72 or 88 or whatever. And it said, forgiveness is not an act, it's an attitude. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. Now, how at 36 years old did I get to that truth? Well, I know that we all come in with more information than we actually have access to as humans.
Yeah.
And my father had a journey. My mother had a journey. I have a journey. My brother, and every other person that had any contact with any of us. This was for all of us, for our own spiritual growth.
Yeah. Forgiveness is interesting, because it's one of those things that, we're taught to forgive, we're taught to go through the words of forgiveness. Can you repeat that quote that you read?
Yeah. Forgiveness is not an act. It's an attitude.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because you can say you forgive somebody. People do it all the time. I forgive you, but there's the resentment, and it's that attitude. Their attitude isn't forgiving, but they they've said it. So they'll say that they've forgiven somebody, but they usually, I mean, often haven't in those situations. But with this, your parents had been divorced for 25 years at that point. I mean, that just, you would think, and please stop me if I'm like thinking about something that I shouldn't, or like asking about something that you don't want to dive into. But it's interesting because I think about myself. I can be hot headed. I can get really mad about things. And, when I was younger, I would break things when I was angry every once in a while. But anger to me has always been this like in the moment, very angry. Space and time always reduces that anger. So 25 years of holding on to resentment, or obviously resentment and negative feelings for somebody. I mean, did they have that much contact at that point? I mean, were they in regular contact at all?
Oh, I love this conversation. And by the way, I'm an open book. There's
Okay,
nothing that I have any resistance to talking to
cool.
about.
Cool.
There are layers to the story. There was a conversation that happened when I can't remember if it was my grandmother or my grandfather, but someone died. We were all together. My mom had come to be a part of that as well. And this was probably about 20 years later. And it was interesting because I remember his presence, and I remember his, it's funny, thoughtful mindlessness. It's really interesting. Like I could see the wheels in his energy field, even though I hadn't really at that point grasped what I have awareness of now. Essentially what happened was he created a story. In the way that divorce happens, you have community property, right? Well, they divorced, they owned a house, the value of the house at the time. Well, this is California. 20 years later, you can imagine that house was worth 10 times what it was when they got divorced. And in his narcissistic victim mentality, he felt like he deserved that money, which is that energy of when we don't see our own lives as created by our own choices, then we look at others to fulfill what we're missing. That is a human condition. That's another. So we don't compare tragedies in my world. Like the idea of you have a tragedy that's perfect for you and your journey. That also means you have the beautiful things that show up in your life, the gifts that are for you that you called forth. Everything is about our own individual journey. And when we look outside for others' stories to feel that we want to emulate them, there's this essence that we're here all mirroring and reflecting one another. And everything that we offer is rippling outward. The key to all this, accountability. Taking accountability for our choices, for our words, for our energy. And on the flip side of that, taking accountability for our energy, meaning what's out there, we don't need to let it in. That's a choice. So I love that we're talking about forgiveness. The other one is I'm sorry. Like, what does that mean? I'm sorry. Did I actually do something to you? Well, here's that thing. We can't do anything to anybody. We have to allow that to happen. Now, someone could say, well, Anne, I mean, people murder and hurt and do all these things all the time. There's all kinds of doing. Again, if we are willing to look underneath the actions of life and drop into the frequency of what we are calling forth as our learning, this experience of being on Earth, it's Earth school. I'm sure you've heard that before.
Yeah. I read this book called Awareness recently. I can't remember the author's name, but I think he was a monk. He passed away, I think. within the last 30 years. He passed away. I can't remember exactly when. Amazing book. And I learned a lot from the book. And one of the things that he went over is like forgiveness. And he's like, I'd rather have someone come to me instead of saying, I'm sorry, saying I've learned. I've learned since that mistake, and I thought about that a lot. And it's like, yeah, it's pretty powerful because everyone has seen this in their lives. Somebody who keeps doing the same thing and keeps apologizing and nothing changes. And it's like, are you really sorry? If you're just doing the same thing over and over and then just saying sorry, it seems like you're just saying sorry so that you can keep doing it, not because you're actually sorry for it. So yeah, I like the concept of learning. That's the real point of, like, if you're going to ask for forgiveness of any sort, ideally you should have learned something along the way, right?
Well, I believe that we will repeat actions until we have full clarity. And that clarity then is really in our body, that we are feeling a shift. And that is, again, a consciousness that we are choosing to tap into that says, I am here aware. I love that you brought awareness in. I'm here aware that I am here to learn.
Yeah.
And that's the awakening. That's what we're talking about right now. Like, on this planet, the veil is thinning. The amnesia is starting to shift away, which I love telling this story. I wrote it in the first chapter that I was published. And it's the story of the family that has a kid. And then they have another one like 3-4 years later. So they got this 4-year-old that says, I want some time alone with my baby brother. And of course the parents are like, we can't leave you alone. Like, you could kill him, do something bad. So they're like, oh, okay. And then they listen outside the door. And the 4-year-old walks up to the crib and says to the baby, tell me about God. I'm starting to forget. When you look at a baby, look at babies and look at old people. Babies and old people, they're closer to God than we are here as our, living beings on the planet. Whatever God is for you. And I love this idea that I love Alan Watts. You probably know Alan Watts. Yeah. He's a funny guy. Yeah. And he has this quote, you can't get wet from the word water. So what does that mean? I don't care what you call it. Call it Ethel. That's my mother's name. Call it universe, divine, mystery, source, energy. It is. And when we decide to allow that is, which I call love, love is the foundation of everything, we're walking a path of consciousness and also empowerment.
Yeah, that same book, that awareness book, he mentions, I really liked what he said here, is one of the biggest obstacles to God is the word itself. And that seems to be in line with what you're saying. And I tend to agree with that, because I used to consider myself an atheist, and then it was all logical. It was a logical journey for me to become an atheist. And then it was a spiritual journey and logical, because everything, like, I'm spiritual, but I'm not the most in tune with spirituality. But I actually stopped. I will never call myself an atheist again, just because I found it to be an arrogant position. To say there is no God is arrogant, because I'm talking about something that is assuming there's a God, or even acknowledging the possibility of a God. I'm saying that something that is beyond my capacity to understand is not possible, which is arrogant. I mean, it is an arrogant position, in my opinion. But yeah, it's interesting how they'll have a conception of what they think God is, and it's not even what they themselves believe God is. I'll talk to atheists I know, one person I'm thinking of, he says, I don't believe there's a guy in the clouds, judging every decision I make or something like that. And I thought about that. I don't always have something clever to say in the moment, but I thought about that. I'm like, that's like a 5-year-old's conception of what God is. That's what a 5-year-old learning about God would draw, on a picture of, a God in the clouds or something like that. But most people, I mean, that's not what they would consider God. God is something much deeper than, caricature,
I love that you're talking about this. I feel like, so I was raised Jewish. Okay. And you couldn't even spell God. It was G/D. It's like, how can you have a relationship with something you can't spell?
Yeah.
Right. So it was the God that I'm talking about and that you're talking about is not the Judeo-Christian God, the God with the robes and the whole business, the God that is punitive, that is fear-based. That's not my God. That's not your God, I feel either. Like you shifted from that God. You're like, I'm an atheist. I don't want that God in my world.
Yeah.
And anybody who's out there that's like, I don't believe in God. Great. I don't want you to believe in that God. That God that we've been taught to be in relationship with is not God. It's the human it's like conspiracy. So I'm not going to go there, but so here's this other piece. You're a Matrix dude. I'm sure, you love that movie and you get that, this is the Matrix.
Yeah. Yeah.
The thing is, there's certain aspects to our human condition that, just hear me out here, help us stay unconscious. Help us, and I'm saying help us, help the collective, help us stay veiled.
Yeah.
And we need them. This planet needs them right now. Well, it's all changing. Everything's totally turning upside down anyway. But these 4 pillars are government, right? That's an easy one. Religion, education, and not health and wellness, but medicine. So for me, how I see those pieces, they are holding up the construct of what everybody is caught up in.
It's religion, government, medication. What was the fourth one?
Education.
Okay.
And I'm saying education in the system as it's presented. Traditional education. Yes.
Which is, education is a lifelong thing. So I always hate it when people think of education as school, because it's like, sure, you learn in school, but it's sad if that's the only time you're learning.
Well, that's the whole thing, is we are here. When we look at Earth School as an entity, that means that we're learning by living.
Yeah.
What we learn in books is indoctrination.
Yeah.
We learn to regurgitate information. I mean, I have a college degree. My daughter's going to school. She's going to go to high school next year. We're not anti-school as part of the system. She needs to get a part-time job. My job is the joy of being, J-O-B, joy of being. I make it up. And these are important pieces that get us to the point where we can find our own truth.
Yeah.
So religion and that version of God, for me, it's spirituality. Spirituality is the mirror of the religion that's here on earth. And spirituality is personal. So religion does serve 3 beautiful things. It brings together community. It brings together a structure or an ethical code, a way of living life. And it brings a way or a means to access God. What it does beyond that is what you as an atheist or an agnostic or anybody else who's rejected their childhood experience, That's what we don't like. We don't like being told what to do. We don't like being told we have to go to church. And if we don't, we're going to hell.
Yeah.
And of course, hey, heaven and hell, that's a condition right here now. It's created. There is no hell to go to. You're living in hell if you feel that there's a hell to be received. That's how I see that.
Would you, because I was going to ask you about the difference between religion and spirituality, but I like to think of like how I would define that. Is religion is a system, spirituality is a way of being, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely.
How would you describe the difference?
I love that. I love how you describe that. I feel like, again, religion is a system. Like you said, it's a system. There's a process. These are the things you do to be religious.
Yeah.
Spirituality is an inner experience. And so I've created community everywhere I go. Like that's part of who I am. Some people don't have that skill set, maybe, as far as feeling the desire to connect with others or be seen. Really is a big part of that. You know, I love being seen. I got a healthy ego, and that's a part of how I show up in the world. It's part of my personality. Not everybody's here to be on podcasts and speak their truth.
Yeah.
And that's awesome, because then we'd have way too many people that are speaking truth and nobody listening.
Yeah.
We're all here for a different reason. And that's the power of honoring who you be, who you are, inherent as love. I'm the love messenger. My greatest dream is that all people know love.
Yeah.
And not the love of intimacy or partnership, even not the love of parent-child, the love of self, the love of existing. And when too many people think for themselves, we have chaos. That's how this planet has set itself up. And again, everything's turned upside down. I was just talking the other day, I was in Sedona, Arizona, facilitating a retreat. And for any of you that don't know, Sedona is a magical place of vortexes and portals and fabulousness. And we were chatting on about how there's giants, and I'm a witch. You know, there's witches and fairies and gnomes and elves and magic. Magic is everything. And growing up, those were fairy tales. Those were books. Those were movies. That was made up. This is the real world. Well, guess what? Nope. This is all made up. It feels real, right? We have tables and cars and bodies. And yet it's truly a hologram. I was raised with Star Trek. Captain Kirk, he's my man. You kind of look like him, actually, the young version. And this idea that when you're on the starship, you're on Enterprise, right? And you get your weekend break and you go to the holodeck. And on the wall is a little program. You code in what you're going to do and where you're going to be. And you go to another planet. You go to another dimension. You go back home. You can be intimate. You can drink. You can die. And then the program's over and you go back onto the ship and you're back at work.
Yeah.
We've been shown through so much media for 50 years what's really happening. But that was shown to us as fake, as made up.
Like, could you give some examples of things that were shown that are relayed as fake but are real?
Let's see. Well, an example is, let's see. Let me come up with an example here. Okay, time. Let's say time. Let's talk about time. Time is related to our solar system, right? Mm-hmm. How the sun moves around the earth and how we recognize like there's a schedule. I was a little bit late. Like we have all this stuff around being on time. Well, twice a year, the powers that be decide we're going to change time an hour. Boop. We just lose an hour or we gain an hour and we shift it. That's made up. Time is made up. We literally shift time. And so that idea of what is solid is really energy. Everything is energy. I recently heard that if you were to take all the bones and the organs and all the, I mean, we're like 70% water anyway, right? Between the blood and the fluids and everything else. And you basically extract all that. Our human form is the size of a pea. Like that's what's left when you take out all the other pieces. So this idea of what is real based on what we can feel and see and touch. How many of you have felt somebody's presence in your mind or in your heart and then they call you?
Yeah.
That's energy. When we look at energy is the foundation of our existence, that energy creates matter. And then matter is what we see as solid. So I'm not a science geek. Like science is, is part of our, again, educational system.
Yeah.
It's frequency. It's vibration. It's the experience of what are we feeling and sensing? We have 5 senses, right? We know them: sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell. Well, we actually have at least 7 more when I tap us into the chakra centers, right? You're familiar with the chakras and the energy centers. Each one of those centers has its own unique signature of sense and how we sense. When we allow ourselves to take off the limitations of this physical form, like the physicality, we open up to a whole other world of possibility where we get to make shit up.
No.
Oops, I didn't know if I had that language in there. Sometimes I've told you can't say those words, and other times we love to say those words. So anyway, that word is there.
The whole time thing is interesting to me because I would see it a little differently. Like when we moved time, like when we changed the
daylight savings.
Yeah. To me, all we're doing is changing the reference. So time stays the same. It's still the exact same time in space-time as it was before. We're just changing our reference point. So instead of calling right now 3 o'clock, we're calling it 2 o'clock or 4 o'clock, whichever direction it is. So I see in that sense, we're just changing our reference point because we're always trying to conform reality to our conceptions, basically. So yeah, I would say we're mostly just changing our reference point when we do that.
That's a great point, Artie, because everything is a reference point. Everything. Yeah. It's where and how we see it from our perspective. 2 people are going to see one thing 2 totally different ways if they're on either side of it. I mean, the coin that's a great example. Heads on one side, tails on the other. If you're standing on the head side, you're like, I don't know where the tail is.
Yeah.
I see heads. So you're right. Everything is a reference point. And how we get to the point where we have the clarity to understand is based on what we've allowed ourselves to be influenced by. And when I say allowed, people can say, well, how do I have any choice in that? And again, it's that depth of you are choosing everything along the way for your greatest expansion evolution, and growth as a spiritual being. You've heard this, you know this, many of you have heard this. We're a spiritual being having a human experience.
Yeah. I want to dive into choice, but I do want to go back to something you said earlier because I've been thinking about the concept of narratives a lot lately because, you know, I deal with political stuff sometimes, and I notice that people don't analyze each piece of information separately. Usually, they analyze it through a narrative, through the lens of a narrative, typically, and maybe not just one narrative. They might have multiple narratives. They often don't even they're not even in alignment with each other. Sometimes they're conflicting narratives. But when you talked about your dad, you said he had a story in his head. So he had a narrative in his head. And it wasn't until you said that I started thinking about narrative through our narrative. Like, if you are living your life, but you have a narrative in your head about your life, are you living in reality?
Well, what's reality?
Yeah, good point. Well, I think of like where I'm coming from with this is I'm typically against labels because like if I label you as something, then I am putting you in a box and saying I understand everything there is about you based on that label, which is never going to be accurate anyway. Mm-hmm. I see narratives as kind of like meta labels, like they are multi-word labels of whatever, but they are just labels. So they're like filtering mechanisms, essentially. So like a label is, you know, politically, I see somebody as a Democrat or as a Republican. That's all I need to know about them. I don't need to know anything about them. Like they're in that box, right? Narrative is, you know, this is a label too, but a good person and a bad person. Like, you know, this person is a bad person. It's a label, but it's also a narrative. This person's a good person, label and a narrative. But they're never going to be accurate. Like a narrative can never fully capture the essence of somebody. So the fact that your dad had a story in his head, does that mean he was not operating like he was kind of not, I don't want to say not in control of his own life, but not being accountable to his own life? He was painting a narrative and placing himself, so he was kind of not participating in his own life. Maybe I'm not saying that well, but
no. Well, here's the thing: he felt disempowered.
Yeah,
and that that wasn't a conversation that we had, but that was like in his expression, like those words. She treated me as a third or fourth class citizen. Those words that he uttered in jail, and you know, we had made 175, you know, brochure things for her service.
Yeah.
500 people showed up. We didn't even know, we didn't have the space for all the people.
Yeah.
Like, and this is a small town. There was like 2 murders in 25 years. I mean, you know, it was like, how can you say that she is that person when like we had this massive turnout? So that was his story, his narrative, that she was that.
Yeah.
What informed him? So here's this other piece. You need to be a victim before you can be a villain. And I say this all the time, hurt people hurt people. You hear that? Like the tone of that? Now, that doesn't mean that like a balanced person and, you know, somebody who's been in therapy and all their life isn't going to hurt other people. And let's take that one back. Like I already talked about earlier, I can't do anything to you. You have to allow that.
Yeah.
And whether that's on the physical human consciousness level or on the spiritual evolutionary growth level. You know, I had an interesting experience after my dad died, because he died a year and a half later, by the way. So he was sentenced a year after my mom died and 6 months later found unconscious in his cell. And it was interesting when my brother called me and I was like, oh my God, he needs to like rot in jail kind of thing. Like he doesn't get out of this quickly. And then I felt into that and it was like, oh, well, this is better. Then I don't have to think about him in jail. And so I've had access on a personal level, on a spiritual level to my guides. I mean, that's a whole other story. We could do a whole other show on that. But, and I've also had people in my life who are mediums, right? Who actually had a skill set to talk to dead people, so to speak. And there was a dear friend of my mom's who was a medium, and my mom had connected with her. And when my dad died, I said to my brother, well, we should call mom. You asked, like, had they had contact over that 25 years? She was always available. She was to help him. One of his suicide attempts, when I was 13, he called her and asked her to take him to the hospital. Like, she was a loving person. She had her own stuff, believe me. Like, we've had our conversations.
Yeah.
And the idea here was I was having a session with a shamanic practitioner, and we'd gone on a journey. And at the end of the session, and it was all about accessing the lineage for my mom and this whole matriarchal lineage and my daughter, and that whole idea of healing, back and forth in time. My dad shows up, like pops into the field and has this message. And this was so instrumental for me in the recognition of we are all here having our own spiritual experience. He desired, so from the spiritual self that says, I'm going to go play on earth, he desired to experience what it would be like to be a villain. From his perspective, he had a successful journey here. He hit the number, he hit the head on the, whatever it is, the nail on the head. He got it. He got what he wanted. But it took being born into a situation that set him up to be a victim. He was abandoned by 2 living parents when he was 5 years old. And then when he was 10, his dad remarried. His mom turned out to be schizophrenic. Like, he had all the fodder for a life that was going to be messy and disempowered. And yet that's a success. We have people on our planet currently and people that have died historically. And we look at them and we're like, you're a real a-hole, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And many of you probably have somebody in mind right now. And the idea is that we're all here for the collective. It's not an accident. Nothing is an accident. It's a matter of being willing to look at life as an opportunity to grow energetically and spiritually. We have put too much power into the human condition. And so when we are willing to say, oh, all these things are here for me, that's a big one. I'm sure you speak to that, Artie. Life is happening for you, not to you. Nothing happens to you. It's for you to grow through, to evolve through, to be with.
So we're starting to come back to the concept of choice a bit, which I find interesting because you say that people choose to live the life that they do, which is interesting because wouldn't that kind of entail some kind of would it be prescience, like knowing what's going to happen before it happens? So like
that kind of like destiny kind of thing, you mean?
Yeah. So do people, I would imagine you're kind of thinking like souls, right? Our soul chooses our human form. Our soul knows everything that's going to happen in that life, essentially, before it happens.
Have you seen the movie Soul, the Pixar movie? I'm a huge fan of
I
Pixar.
didn't know. No.
I'm a huge fan of Pixar. The minds behind Pixar, as far as I'm concerned, are tapped into God
Yeah.
because the things that they offer. This movie, Soul, I highly recommend it. Go out and see it. And I'm not getting paid by Pixar, by the way. But the idea is that it's literally what you said. They're these little eggs and they're at Earth school and they open up, they're in their little school situation. All the little eggs have faces and arms and legs, and they open up this big hole and they look down and they look at Earth and they go, "Oh, I'm going to be a that." And they're like, "Cool. I'm so excited." And then they go get in this line and then they slap some personality on you that has you have the hardest time to get to your intended goal. Okay. So that's a movie. And the way I see it is that's where the amnesia comes in. We begin intentionally. I'm going to choose my parents who are going to offer something to me. People say to me, why would I choose to be given up for adoption? Let's look on the other side of what that is. What is given up for adoption bring up? Betrayal, abandonment. Okay. So if those are the things you're going to call in, what do you feel would be the intended goal? Self-love, self-compassion. So if you come in with this situation that has none of that going on, you've got your work cut out for you. You are going to now seek out reflections that are either going to tell you, yeah, I'm worthless. Nobody wants me. And then you're going to create this whole story around it. Or you're going to begin to access another part of you, your soul self, that says, I am worthy, and I'm going to seek the experiences that are going to remind me of that.
So I think the easy question is like easy way to not think about this, but like one of the blocks people might put up is like, well, why would I choose to be maybe poor versus like I could have been born into money if I had the choice, right? Like, why wouldn't everyone just choose to be born into like a life of privilege where like, very little struggle and stuff like that. But even beyond that, that's looking at people who live long lives. Some people die, hours after birth, within the first year of life, within the first few years, which we typically don't associate with any sort of like spiritual growth or like, personal growth or anything. Cause like you're barely conscious for your first few years on earth typically. So like, why would a soul choose to be born into a body that will die within a few days or something like that? Where's the growth? Where's the journey in that?
I love that you asked that question, and I usually bring it forth. So perfect. Why? Okay, first of all, we don't ask why in my world. WHY is not a word that we talk, but I will talk about the letter Y. The letter Y begins the word you. Okay. And that requires that you are an I with a V on top of it, victor or victim. Okay. That's your personal journey. Remember, we talked about where none of us are in isolation. So to directly answer your question, what would be serving? So not why, but what would be serving from coming onto the planet and then dying within hours or years and or having some cancer journey, St. Jude's and all the children that have cancer and all the trauma that happens and people being hit by cars and murdered and way before their full life, right? Like what kind of experience is that? This is where nothing happens in isolation. This is where we are here as a collective energetic frequency. This is where we are all here at this time for our collective experience where everything is happening for us. So what does that mean? That means that the death of a newborn or a child, or the horrors that we talk about that happen in people's lives, they become the vehicle for others' growth. The parents that birth a child that dies within hours or suffers for years with trauma, that becomes part of their journey. And that's that place of we volunteer. So there's another piece to this that we haven't talked about yet. Soul contracts. Have you heard that before?
I've heard of soul contracts typically in the context of like you're selling your soul to the devil kind of thing. You're selling your soul. I mean, this isn't something that I've done any research on, but like I've heard it in the context of soul contracts, sell your soul to the devil to get ahead in life, get whatever, that's the context.
So that's an earth concept. That's
Okay.
the earth perspective on soul contract. And again, ties into the Judeo-Christian model, going against government, so on and so forth. Soul contracts are where two souls, before incarnating, have a meetup. And they're like, okay, I want you to show up at this point in my life and really mess me up because that's going to help me grow. And then the person's like, no, I don't want to do that. That's going to really be icky. And they're like, no, I really need you to do this for me. Okay, we shake on it. That's a soul contract. And I know every single one of you has relationships in your life where you're like, oh my God, that was so hard. And you get to decide, what did that mean for you? Did it offer you the experience of feeling empowered? There's this wonderful equation that I learned from Jack Canfield many years ago. E plus R equals O. Okay. So we have E is the event, the experience, plus R is the reaction, the response, equals O, which is the outcome. Once the event is gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
The story, we were talking about story earlier, narrative, that comes from how we handled the experience. Did it offer us empowerment? And we're like, wow, I had this really, this is where I'm coming from. This is the Lotus Path.
Yeah.
Yay for the mud. Bring it. Because that has shown me how I have been and how I be and how I offer. When we're taking responsibility for our lives, meaning that we're calling in really hard stuff, people. I promise you, you're calling it in for your growth. I know you don't like this. But that is that we get empowered when we say, oh, I quote unquote asked for that. And look what I learned about me.
No. But some people go through their, I'd imagine it's kind of the same explanation. Some people go through their lives without, it doesn't seem like there's any spiritual growth there. They can be assholes their whole life. They never change, never seem to feel bad for how they are. I mean, I think everyone has come across people like this. And then there's some people who they seem to drag everyone down around them. Like, and my personal thing on that, like whenever I come across somebody like that, I'm like, I'm just going to keep my distance because it's not something that's for me, But would that be the same thing? Like that their purpose is just to create challenges for people okay.
So let's just say this. Everything's a reflection.
Yeah. Everything.
It's a reflection of who you're being, how you're being. I guarantee it. I'm sure you've done this. You even said it like, oh, I'm going to stay away from that situation. Everybody, take a look at the 5 people that are around you, the 5 closest people, partners, maybe children, friends, coworkers. Take a look at how they're showing up. You're going to be showing up like them because everything is magnetism. And so, I had a situation probably about 10 years ago, and I was like, I have so much love and light to share, and I want to talk about it, and I love talking about it, and I love talking about all these great things. And now I get to do it on podcasts, and you either listen or you don't listen. But the deal was, I saw people start to fade or walk away or glaze over. I'm like, I'm saying really amazing things. Why don't you want to listen? Light burns. When you stare at the sun for a while, you're going to get all kinds of weird shit in your face.
Yeah.
The deal is that light burns, and yet you can't see the stars without darkness. So we live on a planet that's based in duality and polarity. Literally, we have 2 poles, right? We have night and day. So again, we chose. And many of you may say, well, all I know is Earth and, our solar system. Well, there's a lot more. There's a lot more in this universe. This is one destination. And we chose a destination that offers us duality and polarity. In the universe, there is oneness. Now, there's still darkness and shadow in the collective field because everything has that perspective. But the idea is that we are in oneness. So recognizing that your presence and what you offer through your life is attracting resonance. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in their field. So this is where, instead of going, oh my God, if I look around and I'm like, you're not who I want to be. Awesome. That's empowering. That says, let's go seek out another way. And that might be through a podcast or a workshop or therapy or coaching or meditation. Come inward. That's another piece of this. You talked about narrative and story. That's all outside. That's outside of us. The work is inside. And everything that we experience through our relationships and events, they are here designed to call us back in. But this world and this earth experience is set up to not look inward. It's full of distractions. It's easy to get lost in this world based on the feelings of it's so much. There's so many horrors going on. There's so many murders. There's so many unfair things. The empathy that is oozing in our planet. And so the way I look at it is when we all sit back and go, oh, okay, like I chose this, you chose that. Go get your life. Go seek out what you're here to experience.
So where does the onus to improve come from? Because maybe no one would ever kind of think like this, but if I'm a jerk to everyone and I just cause chaos everywhere I go, and then I hear you say, well, we know what we're getting into before we come on this earth, and the people in our lives know what they're getting into. Isn't there some risk of somebody hearing that and saying, well, I don't need to change. This is what I'm here for. So what drives, where does the onus to change come from?
I love it. Here's the deal. It's yours. Yeah. It's your life, and you get to lead it however you want. And here's this other piece. I mean, I haven't died and come back. Okay. Like this is all my essence, my feeling, that what I've learned over the years, the people that have been my teachers, how I've tapped in, my own guidance. So I could be making all this shit up anyway, and it feels resonant and aligned for me as to what truth is.
Yeah.
And I do feel, and I like to joke about it, there's a lot of people on this planet, they're going to die and they're like, oh shit, I missed the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And then they're going to say, I want to go back and do it again. And maybe they will, and maybe they won't. We don't need to worry about anybody else's path. That's the other thing. Stop worrying about everybody else's story.
Yeah.
That's where we're getting caught up in, is like, that person is behaving improperly. That person is hurting other people. That person is leading their followers into chaos. It's funny. I've been reading Ram Dass's book, Be Here Now.
Yeah.
And he wrote about, the occult is a shared system of belief.
Yeah.
I'm going to venture to say that being a human is being in a cult. We share a system of belief being on Earth.
Yeah.
And it's about allowing for what is being felt and witnessed in how you are offering energy and how others are receiving energy and how you're learning from those dynamics. Everything here is relational. We're relating with ourselves. I mean, animals, if anybody has animals, they are powerful teachers. And they really do reflect what we're working through. I see animals as volunteers, and they come on the planet to get all kinds of, I feed my animals raw food, and they got all kinds of cozy things, and they still have issues. My cat still pees all over the place. And it's like, what are you doing? You're making me crazy. Well, that's for me. So I can get mad at her, or I can clean up pee.
Yeah.
That's a choice. So they show us, everything's here to show us what we're learning. I have 3 great questions, and why is not one of them. Where are my edges? What does that mean? That means that, I'm sure you've talked about this before. I'm sure you get it. I see it all in your stuff. We have auras. We have energy fields, right?
Yeah.
Where is my energy field being held in order for me to experience my full self, my true self? And do I feel safe in that, or does it not exist? And I'm constantly getting bombarded with other people's energy. Or is my energy field spiky? Am I offering attitude and negativity to others? Well, then that's for them to deal with, right? But I get to take a look at that. How am I showing up with my edges? And how is that truly serving me? So then the other question is, what am I learning? We're here in Earth School. What am I learning about this relationship, about the fact that I was mindless and then something happened? And then I'm like, oh, that's because I was over there and I wasn't paying attention. I get to learn something from that. I'm like, oh, well, next time when I'm driving, I will be paying attention and not crash into that car. And then, how is this serving me? Where, what, how? No why. How is this serving me? That is where we stand in taking accountability.
Yeah. Negative behaviors can serve people in seemingly positive ways, though, too, right? Like a negative behavior, you can be manipulative and get what you want from it. So, like, manipulation does work. You can be deceptive and get what you want. Yeah, like there's tons of negative things we can do that can result in, I don't want to say like outright positive outcomes.
No, they're serving. I was ready for you to go there. They're absolutely serving. People get really mad at people like me who are talking about love and light and spirituality and oneness, and they say I'm spiritually bypassing. And there are people that are holding a container that says, be in the love, be in the light, and you're going to be great. That's not me. I'm the Lotus Path. Seek out the mud, friends. So to answer your question, yes, that is serving. It's serving for you to be an unkind person. There's lots of nasty words for that. And learn about how you show up. Because again, you're going to get the information in the people around you. And you may not be conscious or even give a shit about how you're showing up. But let's go back to, well, that's your spiritual journey. And I called you into my field so that I could remember what I'm here to learn. When we continue to come back to that point that says, how is this showing up in my life for me? And not looking at it as being the victim that can't move through it, but more the victim that can choose another way of looking at it and saying, I am now the victor from experiencing that victim energy.
Yeah. When I think about my own life, like I have more than plenty of flaws, you know, like I have tons of things that
You're not perfect?
Very, very much not so. But like, so let's say I'm like dealing with a customer support person and I'm more rude than I would like to be. I'm like, I don't like the way that I treated that person. You know, they're just doing their job. I was rude because I was pissed off about the situation, not at them. I can reflect on that. And I think a lot of people do reflect on that. But then some people won't. Some people will just do it and they'll go to the next one, do the same thing. Not that I don't repeat mistakes plenty of times, but there is some self-reflection there. And even trying to be self-reflective, you might repeat it because it did serve some purpose, you know. Mm-hmm. If you make a fuss, you might get fees removed or, you know, be able to return something that they're not letting you return, whatever it might be, right? But then the person who just goes through and they do that, they get what they want, they're moving on to the next person. There's no reflection there. Is their life literally just to create mud for other people?
Yeah, I like that. I mean, that's who my dad was.
Yeah.
He had 4 marriages that, you know, came and went, suicide attempts. He showed up in the world as a very aggressive. So the manic depressive energy is, when it's in its extreme nature, can be very abusive.
Yeah.
And receiving on the other end of that is not comfortable. And so honestly, this whole conversation, right, is about how is life showing up for us and how do we get to handle it? So yes, I'm not a video game person. So I got the what is it? The non-NPC. Yeah, exactly. So you know that you're the avatar, right? You're in there and you're doing your thing, and maybe you have a buddy or like 3 or 4 of you are playing online, and we know, like, I know you have a name. And so now we're all in this video world. But then there's all the other beings, right, that exist to mess us up, like to create the game.
Yeah.
That's what the human condition is. There are people here that won't wake up, and that's okay. Why do I care? Because they're here to teach me something. When we look at it that way and we say, oh, this is for me. Oh, this is for me. And I've been that person, Artie. I was like, I've gotten off the phone and I was screaming, yelling, being a total asshole. Like, you know, you can't imagine me doing that. I know, but this is that part, you know, and then I reflect on it. I'm like, oh man. And you said it already. I was feeling depleted. I was feeling ungrounded. I was feeling already hurt and frustrated, feeling a victim to this situation. And that is then how I acted from. And I've done it other ways where I'm like, oh, this is not a yummy thing. And I'm going to take a deep breath and drop in and be vulnerable. I recently came up with the idea of the valley of vulnerability. And most of us stand at the tops of these tippy top mountains and scream at each other. And what's the fallout? I mean, that's our governments. If we look at that, governments scream and yell at each other. What's the fallout? All the people. When we decide to come down from the mountain and stand at the base of the mountain, which of course is a much wiser foundation than being on the top of a tippy top point. And we're also so much closer to each other. We all get to choose whether or not we're going to be in the valley of vulnerability. And if somebody else isn't in the valley with us, that is learning. Because then we say, oh, you can't meet me here. I choose to be here. So what does that mean? I get to choose to be out of this relationship or this job or this living situation. When we are willing to really sit in and lie in and be in that this life is here for us and everything that happens is for our greater journey, then guess what? We don't have to worry about anybody else's stuff.
No. When you're this valley of vulnerability, is it something that you stay in all the time, or is it something that you go in and out of? Because I'm thinking about vulnerability, and I can think of situations where it's like your defenses are up and you are hostile maybe to somebody, and then maybe you go too far in what you say, and then you feel bad, and then you start being vulnerable, and then you can come down and say, I didn't mean that. This is how I'm actually feeling. You get to the conversation that really you should have had before you blew up, but sometimes people blow up or things escalate and then they come back down there. So like, ideally, are you just always in this valley of vulnerability, or do you just go in and out?
That's a great question. I love that you're posing that. For me, I really initially felt into it as a choice to go and meet somebody in that place. Yet, I like the idea of how we walk through life being vulnerable.
Yeah.
And this other place is that vulnerable has this bad word energy. You're too vulnerable. You're too naive. You're too gullible. These kind of things. You need to man up or get a thicker skin or all these pieces, right? Well, guess what? That's also all about the energy boundaries, right?
Yeah.
So we can stay vulnerable when we know that we have our energy center holding us. And the difference between vulnerability as in I trust and vulnerability as in I'm afraid, those are two different types of vulnerability.
Yeah. Well, and it matters how they're received too, right? Because if you're vulnerable around somebody who doesn't appreciate that vulnerability, they can, I mean, hurt you emotionally, but then they can also use that and go deeper than that as well. And then if you're, I mean, it seems like there's some situations where you don't want to be vulnerable. If you're being mugged, held up at gunpoint or something like that, it doesn't seem like vulnerability would help in that situation at all. It seems.
Yeah, but antagonism isn't going to either.
Yeah.
So really looking at, okay, how do I handle a situation like that where I'm literally, my life is in danger? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say something right now that I'm sure you get, Artie, and your audience, is that we're all dying. We're all going to die.
Yeah.
And some of us are going to die by the hand of others.
Yeah.
Or by the plane. Or we're going to die because of a cancer journey. And I think we all have this idea that we all want to die at like 90 something years old, peacefully in our bed, and that's going to be the great way to die. Well, the truth is we die as we live. Our death will be a reflection of our life. My partner, so I didn't get to share this story. At my mom's funeral, somebody said to me, "How are you?" It's such a funny thing to ask people in that position. And I laughed. I was like, well, it's not messed up or anything, like my dad shot and killed my mom. I said, but it's not my partner, the person I share my bed with. And the strangest thing, when those words came out of my mouth, I was like, why did I say that? I wasn't even dating anybody at the time.
Yeah.
Fast forward, I met my partner who I was to marry, and we had a daughter, and she was on a 4-year cancer journey, and she died when our daughter was 2. And when we met, and then she got cancer, even though we lived for 4 years in her having a life and pulling full remission and all these things, there was this little niggle in the back of my mind that went, interesting that I said that those many years ago. For me, what I identified that experience with is I felt like I saw a future timeline. And I've had that happen before. So we talk about premonition, things like that, deja vu, things like that. So that kind of brings us back to another conversation we had about destiny or a plan, God's plan, these kind of ideas, right? Back to the little soul movie and the eggs. Hey, I'm going to be a that. Yes, I do believe there's an intention and a design and a desire to incarnate and to achieve something. Like my dad, hey, I want to be a villain. I don't really think of him as like a wise soul, right? He's on that soul journey, but he got what he wanted.
Yeah.
So if we are willing to step out of our judgment of what living a successful life is, then we can let everybody live and let live.
Is it always best to just live and let live though? Like, I mean, are
It
you
is.
living and let living? Like, aren't you helping people to be better? Aren't you helping people? So like, are you living and let living? Are you?
Well, I'm going to answer that in 2 ways right now. And I'm going to say this. When you work with me, you say yes to you before you say yes to me. Where I stand from in my teachings and my wisdom is that this is a solo journey, but it's not meant to be done alone.
Yeah.
That means that, so I have been doing healing work as a body worker, as an intuitive, as a channel, as a teacher, as a coach, as a guide. I can't do anything for you.
Yeah.
I have the beautiful opportunity and gift to live my life, to offer myself, and to walk along. I walk along the Lotus Path with you. And if anybody out there says that they can heal you or fix you, take that with a grain of salt, my friend. Because first of all, healing is never done.
Yeah.
And it's not my job to fix you. And yet everything in me desires to help and support people find themselves. That is how I approach this work. And I also hold a vision of you in your greatness. People say to me, "Oh, you're so amazing, Anne." I'm like, "So are you, because you're in my field." Like if you match me, if you meet me, if you see me. Okay, let's go back to this one. When we point a finger at somebody, okay, 3 fingers are pointed back at us. 1 at you, 3 at me. Actually, a thumb too, if you think about it, moving back this direction. Triggers. We talk about triggers all the time in this world. Like I get triggered. You triggered me. Well, what's a trigger? It's a mirror. And you're looking at that person. You're irritated by what they're doing. So why would you be irritated? 1, That's a behavior of yours.
Yeah.
And you're not really willing to look at it.
Yeah.
2, you don't know that it's a behavior. It's latent. It's hidden. And now you see it in this other person. You're like, couldn't imagine being that, but it's that core stuff that's under the part of us that gets all aggro when we're talking to the person on the phone, that like, we want to get our feedback, right? Like that, like ugly that oozes out when we're ungrounded.
Yeah.
When we see somebody else represent that. The glimmers are the same. You see an amazing person teaching you, or in a movie, or on a podcast, or in a book, or your neighbor. You are them. You have that. And there's enough there for you to say, oh, I recognize that. And that's where my job comes in, because I say, you are that. Let's uncover it together.
Yeah. How do you feel about, or what is your impression of psychedelics? Like when people take psychedelics, there's usually some spiritual aspect of it. Not that everyone is doing something spiritual when they do psychedelics. Some people are just trying to escape reality or whatever it might be. But I think when a lot of people, when they do psychedelics, they're searching for something, they're trying to get in touch with something, or they're trying to kind of remove the veil in a certain sense. What do you see as happening, and have you worked with people who have had a lot of psychedelic experiences? And I would just love to hear your thoughts on psychedelics in general.
Yeah. Well, what's really funny is Ram Dass, Be Here Now, was the father of psychedelic exploration in the Western world. I've had my own journey so there's a therapeutic, wonderful man, Dr. Gabor Mate, works a lot with psychedelics as well, and often works with people who are working with addiction. So you're like, why would you add drugs to addiction?
Yeah.
Well, what's addiction? In my experience, addiction is a place where you're looking for connection, and you're finding it either alone in that psychedelic experience or in the community that provides it. And the root of addiction is essentially not feeling self-love, not feeling love. That's how I see it.
Yeah.
So I've done medicine journey work with a practitioner, and, high doses of MDMA and mushrooms. So I've had my own experiences. I've played with LSD and my own, like more what we call like social experience.
Yeah.
I'm going to admit this, I've had cannabis in my world for, over 30 years here and there, and sometimes every day and sometimes with friends, and everything's a teacher. And what I believe psychedelics and medicine and plant medicine offers us, especially for those of us that are really body-based and matter-based and structural-based, an opening, an access point. You could say getting closer to God. Now, the flip side of that is if you live in that state all the time, then you're out of reality, right? Well, what's reality?
No.
We've already been dancing in that, right? What is reality? And so the psychedelic opportunity, and I see it that way, an opportunity is a way to tap in.
Yeah.
Is it seen as a way to escape? Sure. So what are we escaping from? We're escaping from the tethers of this human condition. I'm sure you're familiar with Michael Singer, The Untethered Soul, Living Untethered.
Yeah.
He didn't really dabble so much into psychedelics as he did to meditation. And so this idea of how can we replicate a psychedelic experience through meditation, doing things like going on a cleanse, eliminating toxicities. I'm not a science head. I don't come from a medical background, but I understand that like the toxins and the aspects of our world, the things that we put in and breathe in, they mess up our receptors. Like that's the technical term, right? So they separate us. So we have two things going on here, Artie. We have the idea that we're a spiritual being having a human experience, and that already has an amnesia, right?
Yeah.
We've separated that. And then when we're in it and we're looking for answers, there are a lot of things that separate us from tapping in. So I can do it in meditation, and I can do it when I'm stoned, and I can do it when I'm doing mushrooms, and I can do it in community, and I can do it by myself. That bottom line is, what's your intention? What's your goal?
Yeah.
And are you doing it with consciousness or are you unconscious? That has been the key for me, to be conscious with every decision to the best of my ability, to hold that this is for me to learn about me, to expand my experience. Does that tap into what you were looking for?
Yeah, yeah. I would say intention is really important with psychedelics. Like, I mean, I've gotten stoned just to be stoned, right? Like I've gotten, I'll smoke weed just to, just to smoke. But I'll, if I'm doing a psychedelic, I'm usually more intentional about it. And yeah, I find that initial intention, and I would say the same thing for meditation, right? Like if you're meditating just for the sake of meditating without really
Because
any
you're
thought about
supposed to, because that's the
yeah,
right thing to
yeah.
do.
Like
Yep.
if it's
Yep.
I'm just gonna do 5 minutes on the breath, and I've done this where it's like you kind of get in the habit of doing something and you're not really thinking about it anymore, and it's like I'm just going through the process, and it's like it actually starts to get kind of like hard to do those
And
things.
it gets annoying
Yeah,
and
yeah. It's like it's a
irritating. So
chore.
that concept of anything that's rote,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It becomes a chore, and then but if you put an intention behind it, like uh, I'm going to take mushrooms today, and this is why I'm taking them, because I want to explore this aspect of maybe addiction or whatever it might be, or just my spirituality or whatever. Yeah, I find that you have a way better experience with that. It took me a long time to know this because my introduction to psychedelics and drugs was not from a spiritual perspective. It was my friends were doing these things. We're going to raves. We're going to take some ecstasy. Going to take some acid, whatever it might be.
We had a similar young adulthood.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it changes over time. It's interesting because it's like if you take MDMA, you're going to feel love. You're going to feel like you just want to be around peaceful, loving atmospheres. That's what you want. And like you want that
and
on psychedelics too.
and the environment is a huge component to that.
Yeah.
I was actually just reading about that in the Ram Dass book when they were doing experiments with people. What they learned was that there was an intention, but there was also an environment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so like if they felt like this was going to be weird, and then it became weird,
Yeah.
right? Or the people around them, like they didn't feel safe. I
Yeah.
have lots of friends who are like, oh, I can't get stoned. Like it makes me paranoid. And I'm like, wow, that sucks.
Yeah.
and it's like, what's the results of that? And I will often say that people that have that experience run a lot of anxiety
Yeah.
in general. Like you can see that.
Yeah.
And so, it's funny. So I'm 56 and I have kind of rejected the whole you need to meditate thing. Okay. And I was like, I live a meditative life. I'm meditating while I'm doing dishes. I'm doing, I'm driving and
Yeah.
it's a daydreamy state. Like, well, I'm going to raise my hand and say, I was wrong. And how did I get to that? Because I realized that is an incredibly important part of me connecting with me in a very intentional way. And so this is very recent, February 26th, I made a commitment and I said, I'm going to meditate without fail for 30 days and see what happens. And in that time, I also went on a cleanse and stopped smoking pot. And so there was a place, and I'm going to be weird and vulnerable right now and say that I felt like I was like, when I was offering all my teachings and all my magic, I was a little stoned, and I'm like, what's real here?
Yeah.
Right? What's real? Me being this way, stoned, or is it not there if I'm not stoned? And I was afraid. Not to say that I've been smoking every day of my life, but there was this ramp up. And what happened was the clarity in my system allowed my truth to be here. And I was like, I'm as amazing sober as I am stoned. And that was a huge gift.
Yeah.
And so the meditation is important because this is a relationship that you are having with you and only you. But I like to bring up the concept of teeth brushing. I know that there's many human beings that never even had a toothbrush or went to the dentist, meaning like prior to the last 100 years. But I know, and probably you have this experience, if you don't brush your teeth at least once a day, it's going to impact you in a way that doesn't feel good. Your teeth have sweaters on them. Your breath is bad, blah, blah, blah. How do we recognize that some of these practices that seem important, and if we don't do them, we don't feel good about ourselves? And that's part of the journey, is recognizing that we're choosing all the time to be in relationship with ourselves. This is, again, a journey of the mirror. Like, how am I being with me and what's serving for me? So I'm a big fan now of the daily meditation, and I find different ways to do it. Sometimes it's outside walking barefoot in the grass. And that's the practice.
Yeah.
Sometimes I sit in my copper pyramid and I have my journal there ready. Sometimes I'm out, maybe even in the car, listening to beautiful music and dropped in that way.
Yeah.
But being able to slow down life and be with and get thoughtfully mindless, hun. That's it.
Yeah.
Being thoughtfully mindless. It's a beautiful metaphor for living this life from an intentional, conscious place.
When one of my experiences when I've done psychedelics is the come down, not that it's a come down, but the coming back to reality, whatever that is. I always have these, and this would actually be like, as far as anxiety for being stoned and stuff like that, my anxiety doesn't come from, it's more of like the thought of having to deal with real shit while you're not in a sober state can cause anxiety. That's why, like, if I'm doing marijuana, it's usually at night. It's usually like it's at home. I'm fine going out on it because I can function pretty well on it. But if I'm home, it's like I can shut my doors. I'm kind of insulated from the world and I can be in my own space. When I do psychedelics, it's like same thing. I don't want to deal with anything real while on anything like that. That would be even worse than just being stoned. But there's always this coming back to reality feeling where I kind of feel sad, where it's like I start thinking of like, there's people being killed right now. There's bad things happening in the world. And you're coming from this, like, usually when you're on a trip or something like that, and I try to be pretty careful with the environment, so it's usually a positive experience for me. And I know people have done bad things while on psychedelics, but in general, like that, it's the farthest thing from the last thing I want to do is hurt somebody when I'm on a mushroom or LSD trip or something like that. But there's this coming back eventually where it's like, yeah, there's bad things happening. right now. Like, this isn't what everyone is feeling right now. It's people don't have this, maybe not inner peace, but this like connectedness. I always feel like a
Mm-hmm.
connectedness. Like, I just want
Yep.
to be loving, and I want other people to experience what I'm experiencing to some on some level, just like love. But then you come back and it's like, that's not the world that we live in. There, people are vying for money, for power, for all kinds of different things, and they're willing to hurt people for it, and even like kind of minor gains they're willing to hurt people for. What would you say that is? I mean, I'm just curious to hear your thoughts. I haven't really talked to many people about this aspect of psychedelics because it is a little vulnerable. Like, it's like, I'll often cry on that, like, come down, because it's like, yeah, you just feel it. Like, it's like you went from this place of like love and peace to, yeah, that's not the whole world right now.
It's so funny. Life is a series of synchronicities
Mm,
and everything is connected. And I literally was reading about this again in the Ram Dass book about that idea of coming down
mm,
and what that offers. And when we look at life as everything is about perspective, and you talk about like there's an insulation that happens in a state of like super consciousness, let's say it's like super consciousness.
yeah,
We've blown up what is the normalcy of our world, and we are in pure light and love. Whether you're stoned or on mushrooms or these other things, that's the idea, is we're tapped in, we're tuned in, we're turned on, right? We're like,
yeah,
wow. Here's the thing. What I would say for you and for anybody else is remember that you always have access to this, even when you're not under the influence. And so that you could even set an intention that says, I'm going to go be in this altered state. And as it begins to shift, right? Let's not even talk about coming down. What if we didn't say we were coming down? We shift and morph into what is our regular way of operating. How might we bring that with us? Bring what we accessed.
mm,
So again, it really brings us right back to intentional living and conscious living. That reaching that state of high is a beautiful gift for that moment. And we know that we can't really operate like that all day long. We'd get nothing done. We'd be like, in the state. And then what about people that go and meditate for like 6 months of the year and they go on a silent retreat and you're like, you just checked out of life, man. No, we're doing it because we're at a monastery. Like we have this judgment about like there's a certain hierarchy of intentional ways of being.
yeah,
And you guys, that remember we talked about one of the 4 pillars is medicine.
yeah,
Not wellness, not health. There is an entire field of keeping people medicated, and that's acceptable. And they live like that.
yeah,
They're on antidepressants, they're on mood enhancers, and these are given with a piece of paper and the gift of the doctor.
yeah,
And yet we're over here doing drugs illegally. We can't buy them in our own state. They're getting shipped in, things like that. Well, mushrooms you could pick off the ground, but if you know what you're messing with. But the idea is everything's accessible to us. And we're going to come back to always, how do we see this as serving for us?
yeah,
There's many people who would never touch a mushroom or a psychedelic experience. And for what I've witnessed in them is like, I don't like being out of control.
yeah, yeah,
And so that really does bring us back to the concept of being tethered. The more that we allow ourselves to be free of the constructs of this human condition, the more we can fly. And so my invitation would be to go on the journey and witness the journey morph and shift. And also set yourself up. When I would do the medicine journeys with, when they're guided with a practitioner, like there was a whole follow up to it. We had some food set out. We did some journaling. So go get high and hang out with your friends and do fun stuff, and just like do it off the cuff. And then also, feel into, I know this is going to change my energy. So do I want to have a bath ready? Do I want to get some candles lit and go to bed? Do I want to have some music playing in the background that you create ease in the transition, right? That's what we're talking about. We're talking about a transition. And so transitions happen in every moment. When we think about the breath, we have an inhale and there's a pause. It exists. It might be microscopic. It may not even be noticed, but there's a pause that goes to the exhale. And that is this, there's 4 aspects to a breath: an inhale, a pause, an exhale, and a pause. Most of us aren't thinking about that. So how do we see our life as a matter of experiences and pauses and experiences and pauses? And every night we get to go to bed and begin again.
I love it. I love to ask people about books. You've already mentioned the Ram Dass book and other books. Are there other books that have been influential in your life that you really recommend? Obviously, you have your books too, which people should go and check out. But I love to ask people about books that they recommend.
The first ever book that brought me down this journey when I was 21 is The Way of the Peaceful Warrior by Dan Millman. And that is a powerful story of intentional consciousness. Recently, I'm a huge fan of, I've been following Lee Harris for about 6 years now. And he wrote a book. It just got released called The Future Human. I highly recommend getting this book. And you can get it on Audible, and it's been released in print. I think it was March 18th it came out. The Future Human. There are there's this really, so yes, the Untethered Soul books. I'm like, my brain is like, what else do you want to talk about? And that is, my brain is empty now.
I love the
But yes, I would say the Ram Dass book, Michael Singer. And there's another really powerful book called Unbound by Dorian Israel. And that's, I don't know if there's any other books by that author. And then my book is Sacred Connection. And I have it right here. I can show it to you. Hee hee. Sacred Connection, Finding Our Path to Deeper Connection with Self and the Divine. And this is an anthology. So I wrote one of the 7 chapters. I curated and produced it. Actually, it began as a 9-week webinar. So it's funny, we're talking about, so I'm going to be really vulnerable right now. And I'm going to say that there was a moment in my life, a relationship had ended, and about 3 years ago, and I was watching the blue sky and the puffy clouds and the summer day from inside the window in the bed with the bong in one hand and the vibrator in the other. And I was like, what am I doing with my life? And I was no stranger. I was 53. I've been on this self-help journey since I was 11. And I said, okay, I got all kinds of tools and techniques, but come to me in my dreams. Nothing happened that night. The next night, though, I was awakened and thumbed on my phone for hours, words that developed into an email that I shared that spoke into how we have all of these parts. And I know there's all kinds of like parts work, but the essence of it is we're so vibrant. We all have addiction. We all have depression. We're all really funny. And most of us don't let that. I did not think I was funny. I couldn't tell a joke. So my favorite joke is, what's a fish without an eye?
What? That's good.
That's my favorite joke. And actually that influenced a book that I'm writing my first solo book and it'll be coming out this summer.
Awesome.
And it's essentially living a God-led life. So I have chosen to take all of my life, pull it into how I see myself and how I see the world, and offer up love and trust.
It's beautiful. And it's been amazing talking to you today. Before we wrap up, can you tell listeners where they can find your work, where they can contact you, where they can find your books and your upcoming book?
Yes. My business website is the lotuspath.love. Yay for love, the lotuspath.love. And the Love Messenger is all over the place. That's my YouTube channel, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I'm LinkedIn. Everything is and the Love Messenger. And I have a community, the Sacred Connection community. There's a free open community, and you'll find it through the website, thelotuspath.love. There are ways to work with me personally, in groups, and you can see all my free stuff. That's all over YouTube. Every month I put out a portal energy perspective guidance, and you can come play with me where I don't even have to meet you, or we get to play in person. And that's holding space for others to shine their light is my greatest joy. And that's what brings us back. I am here to help people remember they're a spiritual being having a human experience and to become more of who you truly are.
Awesome. I didn't know that there were .love domains. That's cool.
I didn't
How'd
either.
you find that? How'd you find that out? Like, did you see?
Because .com, there wasn't a .com. And I had a .net for my Lotus Touch was my first website, my first business doing body work and doula work. And then the choice, and I was like, well, that is awesome because the whole thing's about love.
Yeah.
So, and that's the title of the chapter in this book. Love is everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that. I love that love is my dot.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, Anne, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, for me as well. I love what you're offering in your own inner wisdom, your own curiosity, your openness, and your desire to be a pillar of light for many others that find you and all the beautiful souls that get to play with you. So I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity to converse and share and be with you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.